Now, you said about slavery. Um, the people you're talking about, the Israelites, are they different from the people in Jerusalem today?
The answer to that question would be yes. And to give you the proper details, I would have to go to the scriptures to show the evidence. And in this setting, we are not going to go to the scriptures. We are going to stay within the framework of history and culture used.
Now, just to clear it up a little bit for myself, are you saying that the children of slavery are descendants of the Israelites?
That is correct.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And we could prove that at least a dozen different ways.
Where would you like to start?
In this entire framework, I'll tell you what I see. I see a king who has an objective of punishing his children for their disobedience to him, even his firstborn. And he then has set a time span for their enslavement, 400 years, even in the new Egypt that is now called the United States of America. The point is, at the time when that was done, and even at the time of Portugal, that United States did not exist. So how did these things happen? It's like a chessboard. You see pieces being put in different places to form a comprehensive unit to accomplish a specific task. Most of the activity behind the scene is spiritual, highly spiritual. But what most people understand is totally physical. So they're missing out on 67% of the background of this subject matter. It is, as I said before, a judgment call. The judge is the king of Israel. He is creator of heaven and earth. And because his firstborn, which would be the Israelites, disobeyed, he has sentenced them to 400 years of slavery as punishment. And as I said, this 400 years would have to be served in a country that will be defined as the New Egypt. And that country, as we know it today, this is going back to the days of Moses, but this country is the United States of America. And again, as I said, we are limited here because we're looking at a historical perspective, but it's still within the spiritual framework. And they did not come straight from Jerusalem to Virginia. There's a lot that transpired through the Roman Empire, through, as we said before, Iberia, through North Africa, through even West Africa before all of that. So this is where we would have to go to flush out the historical perspective in a spiritual framework.
Did this happen a little after 70 AD, that migration?
That's correct. That's when a lot of it began. And by 135 that year, the 99% of all the Israelites had already left the Promised Land. They were throughout, Asia, Africa, and then later on into the Roman Empire, around the Mediterranean to the south especially.
So they spent about almost 1,000 years traveling in Europe.
They spent a lot of time, and it is an amazing appreciation of the wisdom of the King of Israel, because in the process, they helped to lay the foundation for a powerful Europe. And I say that because when we look at the economy, we see a lot of our doings as Israelites. We see the same thing in Western Africa. We see the same thing in Western Asia. And wherever we go, we put our hands in that country and lifted it up. But we did not benefit from their prosperity. And that in itself should give you or give us an inkling of where we're heading. Because how is it that we lift up those that were in the garbage pail, but then they get to rule over us without our ancestors receiving any benefit from their rulership?
So while the Israelites are in Europe for almost 1,000 years, they're also in Africa as well?
That is correct. They were in Africa, then they were transported from Africa to the to the Americas, to Virginia.
That's the Atlantic slave trade you're talking about.
The Atlantic slave trade,
Okay.
that's correct. But the key here, because let's look at it this way. The Europeans did not have the education to know about traveling the oceans. They couldn't even run their own household. There were no colleges, no universities, nothing. These are people that were stuck in the garbage pail. So with our forefathers coming into Europe, they were lifted up because we injected a sense of appreciation, not only for what the surroundings, but also to look, because the key here is the covenant. This is the one motivational component that helped our Israelite forefathers. Because we had the covenant with the God of Israel, we were in a position, and according to the covenant, we had to teach our children. We were in a position then to be strong and confident on education. And we're not just talking about memorizing stuff. We're looking at a comprehensive perspective to know what is written, why it's written, and how to take advantage of it from different perspectives. We're looking at a holistic educational process, right? And whereas the Europeans, even today, theirs is lateral. It goes out, but it doesn't ever, end at anything. Whereas ours continue to encircle the earth, around and around the earth. All I'm suggesting is that we got our knowledge from our Father, and we return to him the praises and the glorification in the process. That is the cyclical manner or the comprehensive manner I'm talking about. There is no lateral where it falls off the edge or something of that nature, or you can't tell the rest of what you're talking about, like what does it mean? So this is why I'm suggesting that there's a lot that the Europeans have learned from the Israelites at no profit to the Israelites.
Now, when Israel left their homeland, were they slaves throughout all these different nations that they went into, and even in Africa, or were they like the common man? Were they royalty? What was their life like?
The Israelites had a great life in Africa, places like Ghana and Timbuktu, Mali, all those places. They did some tremendous learning. They set up
Were these places built by them?
Yes, a lot of
Okay.
these places were built by them. Like I said, they had advanced knowledge, and later on we can get into some of the details. They understood the agricultural process very well, and given the fact of the climatic conditions in any prevailing geographical location, they were able to take advantage because they understood certain things that most people may not even understand today or take for granted, whatever. So they did well at Timbuktu. However, one of the things that they had to come to grips with was that a part of the cast of this universal change was the Ishmaelites, who were known today as Mohammedans or Muslims. And they controlled a lot of the economic routes back then. So in order to get into those routes to sell your produce, you had to be in one accord with them to a certain degree. In other words, you had to make agreements, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes we take these agreements too far, and before you know it, we are intermarrying, and as we intermarry, we begin to serve their gods, which was another error, and so on and so forth. However, some of them, they pretend to do it, and then in the latter of the day, they will come back to their own culture. But nevertheless, you can only do that for so long before generations start to think, well, hey, we're all the same. So they profited well. They had gold. They had books were one of the most expensive commodities, and they fished, and all the different products that they did in Western Africa. However, because they were associated with the Ishmaelites, that created a lot of confusion, created a lot of competition, and one thing led to another, and before you know it, they're being sold by the Ishmaelites to the Christians.
You mean confusion meaning identity?
Not necessarily identity, but remember that we're in a spiritual environment, meaning the global or the universal aspect is highly spiritual. And remember that we talked about an objective. The objective was punishment, punishment of 400 years of slavery. So the judge has already made the decision of the punishment. He also made a decision as to where these Israelites were going to serve their punishment, how long it was going to be, and so on and so forth. So they couldn't, or they wouldn't naturally just go there and say, okay, enslave me. Somebody had to do that.
Right.
That's where the casting comes in. The Ishmaelites were selected as the sellers. The Christianity was selected as the buyers. But neither the Ishmaelites nor Christianity were strong enough to do that. So they had to be given a leg up. And it just so happens that the Israelites were with them and they supported them in that endeavor. Maybe in good faith, thinking they'll get it in return. They never got it. We're looking at a prescribed judgment made by the God of Israel. And he, as creator of heaven and earth, he had a casting. He casted the children of Shem, the children of Ham, and the children of Japheth to do a particular job. Now, did some of that get contaminated by another guy who was trying to usurp his authority? Yes. Did they find that other guy more appealing than him? Yes. Was that other guy have good intentions? No. So did the other guy know about the Israelites? Yes. Was he trying to turn the Israelite away from their father? Yes. All of these are questions that have to be answered. We cannot look at what the neighbor is doing. We have to look at what we are doing. Yes, it may be a little bit difficult because the neighbor is making it a little bit more challenging for us. But there's always a way around it if we can work together. I might not have all the answers, but if I come and sit and talk to you, I might get a few suggestions that I could work with. And then you can go and talk to somebody. And before you know it, we're working as a team. So whereas one person didn't have the solution, now we have 12 people. And the solution is right in front of us. And we take it one day at a time. Now, it doesn't mean that the other guy that doesn't like you or like me is going to change. He might even become more aggressive because he is seeing that regardless of what he does, there is some measure of prosperity, some measure of personal and collective development. He doesn't like that. So he has to keep going. The issue is that, as I said, each one has a role to play. Some of those roles are good, some are not so good. And as I said before, our objective, or the objective of our Father, who has prescribed the judgment, is we've got to be punished for things that we did wrong. And we have to end up in a country that is not known by our forefathers, where we will be served as slaves. We have to have all of this in place before we get there. So we're going to start out with the Mediterranean region of Europe. We're going to move into Iberia. We're going to move into France, southeast France and Provence. We're going to go into Britain. We're going to help to make them strong and powerful. Then the British are going to say, you know what, the world is ours. We can do anything. And they're going to go out and settle. And they settled Virginia. And once they settle Virginia and they settle Canada and they do all of this, then they think that nothing can stop them. In the meantime, in Rome, you had the Vatican, the popes, overthrowing the North African Empire. Overthrowing the Phoenicians at Carthage. And then with that, we found that they were inspired to go further. Next thing you know, they set up the papacy, which is their own popes doing their own thing, rather than listen to us, our forefathers out of Carthage and Numidia. So now they recognize, oh, well, we could sail the world now. And that's where Columbus comes in. And of course, he learned from us certain things, right? Not all of it, the maps he learned, but he learned from the Phoenicians, who were good sailors, you see. We talked earlier about the philosophy of idolatry coming from Egypt and Babylonia. Everyone has a hand. And there is so much that came together in Rome and in London, you know, that helped to empower the European. Now he can go out and conquer. Now we have a land ready. It's called Virginia, right? It wasn't the United States until 1776. It was Virginia. And from Canada, the border with Canada, to Florida was called Virginia. Now they can go out and conquer. And Columbus comes, and he does what he has to do. And he inspired others to go beyond, and so on and so forth. And that's how things got out of hand.
So all this really started because the Israelites weren't doing what they're supposed to do?
That's right.
That's it? That's the beginning of this?
That's right. But again, it is not just like you're in your own house here. The world belongs to our Father, and he called us to be his inheritors, to be his witnesses, and to be his servants, so that we could inherit the earth. We didn't do it. We went after other gods, and he's, okay, so you're like them, huh? Okay, I'm going to give you some time to spend with them. See how you like it.
You know, I have children, and when they were younger, you would put them in the corner when they're bad. When they get older, you take a phone from them. You take something that they like. You discipline them. So it sounds to me like the God of the Israelites, his form of disciplining is enslavement. Would that be correct?
In this case, yes, that's correct. Because, okay, there's so much to the word in itself, because you have to submit to somebody else other than the one you should be submitting to. And that's where the bondage comes in. That is where you have the person or the people you're submitting to have full reign over you. That is why they can name you now, right? Before, when you left to Western Africa, you were Kunta Kinte. Now you get to Virginia, you're Toby. And they're going to beat the heck out of you till you accept that name, Toby. Now Toby is your Christian name. See what I'm saying? And Kunta Kinte, which would have meant priest or prince of earth or whatever. Now, what the hell does Toby means? You know, junk, whatever. The important thing here is you can't look at the oppressor. You have to look in the mirror, see what it is that we are doing wrong, and try to find a way to correct it. That's where sometimes we make the mistakes. So the best thing for us to do as the chosen people is to understand, first of all, who chose us and for what reason. Once we get that, then we will know how to serve him correctly. And once we serve him correctly, we will benefit from his wisdom. But if we don't do that, then we have a problem. And you don't want to mess with him.
Now, it seems like the Portuguese, while they're going through this whole campaign, seeking and looking for the Israelites and throwing them out, there's also these tall ships arriving in the west coast of Africa, capturing, stealing, kidnapping Israelites as well, and bringing them to the Caribbeans. You said Georgia, because America wasn't Virginia. Virginia. The UK. What was who started the Atlantic slave trade around this time?
You know, to be precise, I probably don't have that information right at the tip of my tongue, but I will say that there has to be something here that is very, very special and unique. Remember, and I have to keep reminding you about this, we're in a high spiritual zone here. How is it then that you have a total different people working together to commit this crime, if you will, or to partake of this crime against humanity?
What do you mean by that? Different people?
The slave trade. And the different people that I'm talking about, you have the Ishmaelites, who are of Shemitic origin, the same as the Israelites, right? Who are partnering with Christianity, the Europeans, who are primarily the Japhetic origin.
Yeah, you don't hear much of that.
Exactly. And even you have another European Gentile, right, of the Khazars, who were financing some of the transactions. They're working together as a team. The question is, what would bring these different people together?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to see that there's a different spiritual component there, working in the midst of them, pushing them forward to do this, because they are believing in their hearts that this is going to be advantageous to them. Maybe it will be immediately, but the long term, there's always a price to pay.
Not knowing that they are pawns in the big scheme?
Perfect example.
Okay.
Pawns in the game.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And they're going through. But the question goes a little bit deeper than that. I say, if you can make $1 billion from slavery, think of the trillions of dollars you can make from freedom. Trillions. That's just me, though, because slavery is confining, it's limitation. The individual is not allowed to use his God-given talent. But once that individual now, you could sponsor that individual. You could sponsor him and say, you know what, I'll give you $100. I want 50%. You know, ever watch Shark Tank or whatever?
Yes.
That's what they do. I want 50%. And then you go back and forth, you end up getting maybe 30 or 40 with a bonus every 5 years, right? And that's just one beginning. And once that goes successfully, start to go successful, you get more and more and more. Why? Freedom. You see, that's the key. And in order to do that, then you have to think freedom. But you cannot get free unless you are a product of the truth, because the truth will set you free. And it just so happened that the person you enslave would be the one that has the truth. The challenge is, does that person recognize it? And are they willing to share it with you? So the point I'm making here is, when the day of judgment comes, what are you going to say as a descendant of the European who've enslaved the children of the king of the heaven and earth? How are you going to say, I didn't know?
Right.
You can't say that. You knew who they were.
Yes.
They sang the Negro spirituals, which are all biblical. You knew something was up. They couldn't read and write when they were singing, right? So why did you take the children of the Almighty King of all kings and put them to pick cotton and tobacco?
Yeah. They knew. They had a relationship with them for
Of
many,
course.
many years in Europe.
Yeah.
They knew exactly who they were.
You should have got those people and say, you know what? Your father sent you over here to be a servant. I'm going to let you be a servant. But you know what? I'm going to cook a meal for you in the morning and in the afternoon. Make sure you're fed and have clothes for you. Why? I don't want to go against your father, because I recognize who he is. I will still put you through. No shackles, right? I'll make sure you have good living quarters. You're not going to get paid. You'll get fed and you'll get your clothes and so on, right? Now, of course, that's rational thinking, but that's not the way they thought, right? They just worked you from sunrise to sunset. Whether you were naked or not didn't really matter. As long as you were making a profit, I was making a profit, and you were causing that profit to grow every year, and so on. So what they were telling me, even as a slave, was that they're dumb, they're stupid. But of course, at the time, I didn't know that, and they obviously didn't know either, because if they knew, they would not have done that. But they fell prey to deception. They felt weak, and insecure. They had an inferiority complex. That's why they're so violent and so angry.
You think they went overboard with brutality?
Of course, they went overboard for brutality. Why would you hang an innocent person?
Yeah.
Just because someone, look, forget that part. Look today, and you will see a situation, and I've examined some of these situations very carefully, while I was in Atlanta, and I would see the police officer who was on the force for 40 years, and he couldn't tell the taser from his gun. He pulled the gun and shot the guy in the back when he wanted to taser the guy. So things like that, you could see that the police officer was there physically, but the one that was controlling him wasn't, he was not in control, in other words. Mm-hmm. So when you see things like that, you go, wow, at least I have the eyes to see what's going on. So all these things are not physical. And that's why I always say Black lives would only matter when you understand or remember the 400. If you don't remember the 400 years of slavery, Black lives don't matter. That's the point that is hard for people to appreciate and to use to progress and make a difference.
Now, the 400 years, has it been up already?
Yes. From 1619 to 2019. But the important point to remember is that our year doesn't go from January to December.
Okay.
Our year is from spring to spring.
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
So 2020 would have been, the spring of 2020 would have been the end of the 400 years or the beginning of our first year of freedom.
Now, you said to remember the 400 years.
Yes.
What do you mean by that? Because every Black History Month, they always talk about the enslavement. That's the beginning of the children of Israel's history, pretty much. They come in ships. That's the beginning. Nobody goes further back and see where they came from beyond that point. It always starts at the time of slavery. So what do you mean look at or remember the 400? Shouldn't they be looking further back to see where their ancestors really came from?
Well, I think they will accomplish that by remembering the 400. However, the so-called Black History Month is a mess. Mm-hmm. It has nothing to do with even the children of slavery, because the intentions of it were cordial and they were friends doing things, had nothing to do with the history of a people. And February is the shortest month of the year.
The
it's
coldest.
Not a pleasant time. What happened to August?
Yeah.
August is perfect. And this is when we can learn about people like John Brown, William Wilberforce, who made the sacrifice for us when we weren't able to make that sacrifice or make that effort. When we will learn about the Negro spirituals and the impact that they have had, not only on the United States, but all the way around on people and the character of the individuals. There's so much to learn. But when you look back at the 400 years, first of all, you will see why we were made slaves, right? And the duration of this enslavement, and how we could turn that around once that time is up. All of this will prepare us to do or make a meaningful contribution in the next 400 years.
The Israelites, it seemed that they were beaten or put to death if they did not convert to Islam or Christianity, right? And like you said, this is a spiritual warfare, and these are spiritual institutions. So now, 2021, you have Israelites that are not true to themselves identity-wise. They're called by all kinds of names.
Then they're not Israelites.
Well, yes. And on top of that, they are actually in the institutions that enslaved them. They're part of them. They worship their gods.
This is another thing that I find intolerable. People will say they'll demonstrate and shout if a police officer kills another child of slavery, however it's done. Then there's demonstrations every day for a month or whatever. Fine, I don't have a problem with that. But then a guy that looks like me, that kills a guy that looks like me, there are no demonstrations. Why? How is it that Black Lives Matter when a person that looks like me is killed by another person that does not look like me? But when a person, and there's more of the latter than the former, Black lives don't matter? I call that hypocrisy. I also say to some of these people, the children of slavery, you're demonstrating against a police officer who did whatever he did. I'm not saying he did it correctly, but come Sunday, you're going to pass him
Right.
up the grave in the graveyard to get to that shrine, to worship and bow down before that stinking cross. I call that hypocrisy. How can you be saying these things and doing something that is completely different? You're killing your soul, but when somebody else does it, you get upset. Doesn't make any sense.